One of the most important concepts for a student to understand is the idea of a client and server, especially in web development. If you think about it, really it's not much different than a client and server in a restaurant environment. A server is some machine in a web environment or in a restaurant environment, a person that takes requests from the client and responds to them. So, for example, in a restaurant, you, the client, sit down at your table, may ask for a glass of water. The server brings you a glass of water. You may ask for a salad. The server brings you a salad, and so on and so forth. So you, the client, are making requests. The server is satisfying those requests. In a web environment, you, the client, are sitting at home on your machine, opening a web browser, and making requests to a server by typing in the address in the address bar of a computer. You might type in www.google.com or angel.lorainccc.edu or whatever. You're making those requests to the server. The server then responds to you by providing you that web page. All right, so there's constantly a dialogue between the client and the server. The client making requests, the server satisfying those requests. Now, with plain old HTML pages, the server's job is simply to deliver the web pages that have been requested and all the associated files. So the server doesn't really have that hard of a job. Think of that as being like at McDonald's. All right? At McDonald's, you go in and you place an order for a Big Mac. Really all the server does is turn, reaches in the bin, picks up a Big Mac and hands it to you. All right? In a web environment, that's similar to the way HTML pages work, static HTML pages. With that case, you have sitting on the server a set of web pages already written in HTML, and when the client requests them, all the web server does is simply deliver them to the client. Scripting, though, however, allows for much greater degree of flexibility and power within a web environment. What scripting is this. Instead of having a set of web pages out there, there's a recipe for a web page sitting out there. Think, for example, of Subway. In Subway, there aren't hundreds of sandwiches sitting behind the counter. Instead, there's a list of ingredients. There's a server that knows in their head the recipes for preparing these different sandwiches and asks you, the client, a few questions and then creates a sandwich custom for you. Now, think of that in a web environment. In the case of, say, Angel. In Angel, when you go and log in, you put in your user ID and password, you see a web page created just for you. It shows you the classes that you're enrolled in. It shows you the grades that you have received for no one else. All right? It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do that with just plain old HTML pages. You'd have to have literally an HTML page for every student and every class they're in and so on and so forth. That just wouldn't work. So instead what there's these little programs, these little recipes for creating a custom web page just for you that goes and accesses the database to see what classes you're enrolled in and so on and so forth, and creates, at the end of the day, an HTML document that gets sent to you, the client. Now keep in mind, in both cases, both in the case of having an HTML document already out there and having a server-side script, what gets delivered to the client is HTML. All right, that's what browsers understand. The difference is it created in advance, like in McDonald's, where it's just sitting out there in a bin waiting to be delivered, or is it created on the fly as you request it? All right, that's scripting on the server side. Scripting on the server side involves running these little programs that will go in and will create on the fly web pages for you. Scripting can also run on the client side. And in the case of client-side scripting, what that involves is involves putting little pieces of functionality right there on the client's browser so that they don't have to hassle the server with all of their requests. For example, a mouse over effect. Sometimes you see if you put your mouse over a thumbnail, you might get a larger copy of an image. All right. What that's a case of is, like in a restaurant, giving you, the client, ketchup and salt and pepper and putting it right on your table. So you don't have to flag down the server every time you make that request. So what's done in a web environment is you're given little pieces of code, little scripts they're called, that you can go and you can do some little customization to your own web page. So for example, you put your mouse over an image, a larger image appears. It's a win-win situation. You're not bothering the server with all these little requests. All right, so it's a win for the server. It's also a win for the client because that response time is going to be much quicker. How long would it take if you had to flag down your server to squirt ketchup on your fries? It would take a while because the server's busy with a lot of other people. If instead you can put it on, you can literally get the ketchup the instant you decide that you want it. All right. So, web development, key point to review, client and server. Client makes request, server satisfies it. In the most simple examples, a client is asking for pre-written HTML pages. All right. And all the server is doing is simply delivering those files to the client. That is very limited into what it can do, however. So what has evolved since the beginning of web development is the use of scripting languages. And what the scripting languages allow is to have little programs on each end so that when the client requests something, the server can do something custom just for that client. And what's more, scripting has also evolved on the client's end so that the client themselves within the browser can do little pieces of functionality and not have to go back and bother the server. All right. Now, the next step in the evolution of that is AJAX, which I will cover in another video.